on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. It's our biggest one yet. I've got a superb lineup of guests, including the man behind the groundbreaking documentary, The War on Children, and the always compelling Douglas Murray. Also joining me tonight is Prue McSween, and from London, Darren Grimes delves into Princess Kate's mystery disappearance. And as always, plenty of lefties losing it. But first, the Dunkley by-election is on this Saturday, and I spent a bit of time in the electorate in recent days talking to the locals, asking what mattered to them, how they intended to vote, and we also did a little quiz to see if they recognise leading politicians like the Victorian Premier, Jacinta Allen, or the PM, or Federal Treasurer. It was an experience. I'm here with Harrison, who's just turned 18, so he's eligible to vote, and yet he won't be.
Yeah, well, not yet at least. Yeah, I don't feel like I know enough to...
It's compulsory, but that's all right. Gentlemen, are you voting in the by-election this Saturday?
No.
Oh, come on. Are you voting in the by-election on Saturday? No? The electoral turnout is going to be possibly the lowest ever. Are you voting on Saturday in the by-election?
Oh no, can I?
Yes, you can if you're from Dunkley.
If I'm from where?
Are you from around here?
Yeah, Frankston. Frankston all the way.
Well, there's a by-election on Saturday. Do you have a favoured candidate?
What's a by-election? No.
Seen the face.
I don't know.
No.
Nah.
What's her name again?
What about this guy?
No.
No. I don't know.
He looks like a Mark or a Mitchell.
Like owns a cybersecurity company or something.
It's a special day.
Yeah, well, we got the pretzel tattoo. It was just three.
And those guys got the pretzel tattoo too?
Two of them, yes.
Two of them. And the significance of the pretzel? Did you work at a pretzel
We work
store?
at Butterkin Bakery. Shout out to Butterkin Bakery.
Do you think Frankston gets a bad rap?
I think it gets an undeserved reputation. Yes, definitely.
The police are coming because you're drinking alcohol.
Yeah, and slurping. But it's frowned upon in this country.
Well, that's not nice.
Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
You gotta love Frankston. To be fair, we did have a couple of passers-by there who knew the Premier, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, but the overwhelming majority, I've got to say, only recognised Albo. Let's bring in my first guest to discuss the day's top stories, Sky News contributor Prue McSween. Prue, let's start in Bayside, Victoria, in Melbourne, in the south, where the Herald Sun's reporting police have warned residents that 290 core youth offenders are operating in their area. Inspector Scott Dwyer said some of these young thugs have been arrested almost a dozen times. There is a core group of 290 youth offenders. 80 of these are really extreme offenders. Prue, residents are hiring private security, putting up bollards, and some are even moving.
And Rita, this is Australia. You know, what I think our politicians, our legal system hasn't understood, that Australia has changed. There used to be a time when we could walk the streets and feel safe. We could go into our bedroom and go to sleep and not feel we were being attacked, where we could park our car on the street. Sadly, because of a number of reasons, you know, we have a situation where we have repeat offenders like these ones who just are laughing at the system. Police are tearing their hair out. We're going to get to a stage where we could almost see vigilantism from, you know, residents. And whether it's social media where these kids who have no self-esteem feel that they can post this stuff to puff themselves up, whether we've imported this trouble, you know, with young people who've come from countries where, you know, the police and authority is disregarded. Whatever it is, the politicians who set our laws and the judiciary are failing us, and we cannot stand for this anymore. This is anarchy on our streets.
Well, I can tell you in Victoria, we are raising the age of criminal responsibility. It's going up this year and then in a couple of years as well. So That seems to be the response, and I don't think that's going to solve the problem. No. Now, let's go to the UK, where Prince Harry has lost his long-running battle. This case was in the UK High Court. He wants police protection when he visits Britain, but the court found the decision to strip him of his security upon his move to the US was not irrational and was instead justified. Prince Harry, though, has penned an emotional letter where he said his family now are in greater danger than his mother was, Princess Diana. He wrote, "This was a position that no one was willing to put my mother in 23 years ago, and yet today, with greater risk, with additional layers of racism and extremism, someone is comfortable taking accountability for what could happen. I would like that person's name. Who is willing to take accountability for this choice, please?" What do you make of that, Prue?
Well, I find the racism part of it very offensive because if anybody's brought that up, it's Meghan. However, I do wonder at the wisdom of not providing security when you think that he is the king's son. And just imagine if someone did do the worst and, kidnap him or whatever. I feel he does need security. Now, they seem to have racked up millions of dollars. I don't know why they can't provide their own private security, and that would be my argument. But at the same time, I think he does need security of some form. Whether the taxpayer should be paying for it is quite another question.
Now, let's go to the US, where the Vermont Principals Association has stepped in to ban a school from all athletic events. Why? Because the girls' basketball team from this school refused to face a team which had a male player or a trans player, a male player identifying as a female. Prue, the basketball coach is unapologetic. Chris Goodwin said, "I've got 4 daughters. I've coached them all at one point in their careers playing high school basketball, and boys just play at a different speed, a different force than the girls play. It's a different game." It's understandable why there was great concern here for the safety of the girls, never mind the fairness aspect of the argument.
Well, he's a hero in my eyes, and I'm sure in many parents' eyes, that, it's the safety, if nothing else. And I know it is a religious school, so they have issues with gender identity and the politics around that. But this is a safety thing, and I think he's absolutely right and totally responsible to be taking this stand. And how irresponsible is this woke authority that they're going to ban all these young girls who just want to play sport, for God's sake, and are now banned from this form of competition. So I just find that this is so offensive, so out of step with what the general public would be feeling. And, wokeness is just overriding safety, concerns about, the rights of people who just want to live their lives, play sport in a natural environment and be safe. I just find this appalling, and I just hope this guy wins the case, and I hope that they really litigate it and teach this authority, who are totally irresponsible, a lesson and hit them in the hip pocket as well as embarrassing them.
Well, let's hope so. The Vermont Principals Association sees sense, because this is what we keep calling for. We keep calling for the participants to take some action and to act in the best interests of the girls, and they've done that. And here they've punished not just this team, but all the teams from the school, this collective punishment for looking out for girls. It's just absolutely crazy. And girls and boys are different. I mean, we see that at the elite level and we see that at the amateur level. It was only a few years ago that the Australian soccer team, the women's soccer team, the Matildas, were beaten 7-0 by the Newcastle under-15 boys, just from Newcastle's. I mean, you cannot compare the two. Prue McSween, always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Rita.
Joining me as he does every week is one of the finest thinkers of his generation, and good news, he is coming to Australia for a sold-out tour. He's the author of international bestsellers, including The Strange Death of Europe, The War on the West and The Madness of Crowds. Douglas Murray, let's begin with the US, where President Joe Biden appeared with Late Night with Seth Meyers, and it went as well as you'd expect.
So I told you all there was going to be an American president who said to Putin, come do whatever you want to NATO. If the other guys on our team don't pay up every single cent they promised to pay for. I mean, God, what are we talking about here?
He then told one of his favourite stories.
American people are incredible, and we're the best. You know, I was asked by Xi Jinping about when I was in the Tibetan mountains with him, and he said, "Can you define America for him?" I said, "Yeah, one word: possibilities."
Douglas, President Biden has managed to go through this entire presidency getting a fairly easy run from the media, managing the media, giving them nothing but crumbs, rarely answering unscripted, pre-submitted questions, and doing vapid talk shows like that.
Well, at least he did manage to sum up America in one word that time. You'll remember that previously when he told that story, or a version of that story on the White House lawn, he said, I can sum up America in one word, which is Himalaya, boom, boom. And you could see even Kamala Harris was starting to get worried in the background.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was in the foothills of the Himalayas with Xi Jinping, traveling with him. I guess we traveled 17,000 miles when I was vice president. I don't know that for a fact.
Look, the American media are simply, as so much media is around the world, it's a partisan operation. Most of the media in America is Democrat. Most of it is simply rooting for its guy. Certainly most of these late night talk show hosts, they're just putting their own shoulder to the wheel and hoping that they can push Biden right into November and beyond. That's the job of much of that sort of legacy media, I'd say legacy comedy sort of world as well. Of course they wouldn't ask him a difficult question. Why would they? They might trip him up. And he's good enough at tripping himself up. As we saw there repeatedly in that interview, if you can call it an interview, he just sort of rambled, interrupted himself, lost his train of thought, and did that thing he does where he sort of forgets what he's going to say and then he says, but anyway. And normally, when somebody completely loses their train of thought and obviously is losing their train of thought, people think, but no, the audience there in the studio and everyone else sort of goes, ha, that's just one of his things. He just says, anyway, I can't remember what I was going to say. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's really not on. And I've said to you before, Rita, I regard this as being very sad. Joe Biden has been in politics for a very long time. And whatever you think of him, has been a public servant for decades. And it's just really not good for him or his family or the country that people just keep pretending that he's on top seasonal form.
Now, he also shared a trip to an ice cream parlour, surprise, surprise, with Seth Meyers. And between mouthfuls of ice cream, he made this very bold, very important declaration about a ceasefire.
Can you give us a sense of when you think that ceasefire will start, sir?
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. I mean, the end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday we'll have a ceasefire.
Okay, thank you.
Douglas, you've spent a lot of time in Israel in recent months, so you know what's happening on the ground there. A ceasefire by Monday, is that realistic?
Well, there's two things that have to be said about this. The first thing is it's just extraordinary the way in which America and other allies of Israel demand that Israel stops just at the point that it's about to win. In the south of Gaza, the IDF has got Hamas in a corner, and they need to, in my view, finish the job. It's very strange the way that so many allies of Israel say you can win a bit, but not completely. I mean, we don't do this, as Neil Ferguson pointed out in an excellent op-ed in Bloomberg this week. We don't do this with Ukraine. I mean, Biden and all the other Western leaders aren't saying Ukraine can only win a little bit. They're saying we're with you until victory. Why is it the case that they do that with Ukraine, and quite rightly in my view with Ukraine, but they don't do it, quite wrongly in my view, with Israel? It's an extraordinary standard. And the second thing that has to be said is the deal that has been on the table in recent days is a disastrous deal for Israel. It involves handing over small numbers of beleaguered, traumatized pensioners who have been held in Hamas tunnels and swapping them for terrorists in Israeli prisons who have carried out attacks on Jews. That is the deal, and it's something like a 10-to-1 ratio that was offered to them of hostages from Israel versus prisoners in Israeli prisons who are there for carrying out terror. And despite the fact that the deal is so advantageous to Hamas, it is Hamas that has turned the deal down. You know, this goes back to a crucial thing in warfare, which is that it is so much easier for people to end up leaning on and putting pressure on their allies and forgetting the fact that the people who don't listen to them, i.e. Hamas, are precisely the people that you need to direct your attention towards. And to my mind, it is a deep shame that in country after country, people have forgotten that equilibrium.
Very well said. I can't add anything more to that. I just want to ask you about what's happening in the UK with the Islamic State bride, Shamima Begum, having her last appeal lost against the British government's decision to revoke her UK citizenship. All the three judges dismissed her case. They said she made a calculated decision to join Islamic State. But of course, the usual suspects are appalled. Guardian types are arguing that in a civilised country, Shamima wouldn't have been made stateless. Is this a miscarriage of justice or a dose of instant karma?
The Guardian seems to think that every country is a totally appalling country unless it follows the precise advice of the Guardian. And if we did follow the precise advice of the Guardian, we'd be Cuba by now. But the interesting thing about the Shamima Begum case is several things. Firstly, this is a young woman who, with her friends, went and joined ISIS knowingly. She was part of one of the most brutal terrorist groups of recent years, and that's saying something. She pretended after ISIS lost that she'd sort of accidentally wandered off, as any of us might. I mean, any of us, Rita, you, me, anyone, I might accidentally go and join a head-chopping, head-hacking group in a foreign country. No, absolute nonsense. She knew what she was doing, and in my view, she should be the first to have her citizenship withdrawn. British citizenship is not a right. It's not a right you can simply have. And sometimes you can join the enemy, and sometimes you can be a traitor to your country, and then if you lose, you can join back to the other side. No, no, no. And just as Shamima Begum has had her British citizenship revoked, I would like to see plenty more people have their citizenship revoked, including the Hamas leaders who live in the UK. But the other thing that has to be said quickly about this is all of the people who carry water for this horrible young woman always use a very interesting word. They say she was groomed, because that's such an incredibly meaning-filled term now. They say she was groomed by ISIS. Well, every single one of these commentators has had and all the lawyers and all the politicians and others who use this case, all of them have shown much more sympathy for this horrible young woman than for the thousands and thousands of British girls who were actually groomed and gang raped by immigrant gangs in Britain in recent years. I am so appalled, although I'm not surprised, that so many people have made a stand on this horrible ISIS girl and not on the innocent girls that they could have made a stand on and didn't because they were too cowardly.
Just finally, we do live in a warped time where anti-racists are virulently racist and those who call themselves anti-fascists behave like fascists. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised that a group that calls itself Hope Not Hate who claim to defend and champion and promote democracy and the rule of law are nothing of the sort, just another pack of intolerant lefters who want to intimidate those who question their ideology. You've written about this group. Tell me just what they've done recently and how they're trying to shame people from following causes they don't back.
They're an utterly shameful group. They're one of a number of organisations in the UK, as in the US and Australia, who pretend to be anti-fascist, but seem to me just to need to drop the anti bit. This group also is wildly misnamed. It calls itself Hope Not Hate. It should reverse it. It's hate, not hope. It spends its time smearing people, libelling people, and doing very, very sinister tactics, about which I think there's a lot more to come out, in order to try to pressure people in society to having the precise far-left political views that Hope Not Hate has. This past week, they dropped a bombshell revelation. They said they had a deep investigation into the tweets, Rita, imagine it, tweets and likes of tweets by somebody who happens to be one of the owners of GB News, which is one of the balancing channels in the UK. And because he'd liked tweets they didn't like, they said this is an extraordinary investigation. Of course, it's not an investigation. It's not an investigative journalism piece. All they did was sit eating crisps at their mum's keyboard whilst doing screenshots. But these people want to be the policemen and the linesmen of our society. And you know what? Groups like this have had nothing to say about the weeks and weeks of anti-Semitic hate marches on the streets of London and other cities. They don't have anything to say about that, it seems. But my, they can really come down hard on somebody they don't like who likes a tweet that they don't like. They're pathetic.
Douglas Murray, it's always a pleasure, and we look forward to having you in the country in the coming weeks.
Can't wait to be back.
And still to come, a groundbreaking documentary already watched by more than 47 million people on the sinister indoctrination and grooming of our children. I'll speak to the man behind the blockbuster. Plus, Darren Grimes answers the questions on everyone's lips, all about where is Princess Kate. And everyone's favourite segment, Lefties Losing It. That's after this. Welcome back. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. And you'll be happy to know Lefties Losing It has arrived at TV game show Jeopardy!
Parts of speech 6.
Them, theirs, themself. Chris.
What are pronouns?
Those are pronouns, neo-pronouns. You have 60...
Zems, theirs, themself, please. Let's hear now from a young lady who identifies as a Therian, and she has some questions.
So first question for other bird Therians, what are some things you do that help you feel more connected to your stereotype? Like, I know that for people whose stereotypes are four-legged, they can do quadrobics, and that helps them a lot. But obviously that's not applicable to bird Therians. I also want to clarify for anyone who doesn't know, quadrobics does not automatically equal Therians. People can do quadrobics and not be a Therian. So that's my first question, how to feel more connected to bird stereotypes. And second question is for systems with Therian alters. Do these alters appear human in our world, or do they appear as their stereotype in our world? Or is it kind of a combo situation? Like we have someone in our system who is both a guy and a vulture at the same time. We don't consider him a Therian because he doesn't consider himself a Therian. He just kind of exists as both of those things at once. Is that how Therian alters work in you guys' systems?
Did you notice that her pronouns are bone and brittle? Good luck with all that, lady. Now let's enjoy this comic poking fun at the painfully woke left. Watch Damien decolonise his car.
Today, I'm decolonising my 2001 Honda Civic. I started by replacing the hierarchy-promoting headrest for these handcrafted bamboo covers from Malaysia, which increase blood flow and are totally sustainable. Swapped out the capitalist air freshener for a traditional indigenous dream catcher. I then used natural alternatives for odour control, using beeswax candles and nanostay incense. before recycling any harmful plastics and reading materials or products associated with whiteness. I then swapped out my palm oil-based snacks for sustainable dried bugs. In order to make the cabin a more equitable space, I deconstructed the seating area into a communal zone, allowing everyone equal access to the controls, without excluding the environment. I then added communal controls to the steering wheel, allowing all passengers to stay in the direction of the vehicle without the need for a main driver, and recontextualised the air with this Somali Bakur spray. I then replaced the car's harmful internal fluids with plant-based alternatives, which actually work just as well without destroying the planet. To finish off, I reframed the rear of the car as an activist canvas for all the current things, as well as adding my pronouns for other road users. Not forgetting Trotsky, who was really enjoying the new look.
Brave and stunning work. Damien is very, very droll indeed. Now, before we go, we had a couple of Australian politicians losing it. These are serving members of Parliament losing it in Canberra with this carry-on. Take it away, Andrew Wilkie and Bob Catter. Oh my gosh. I mean, we sometimes poke fun at parliamentarians having punch-ons overseas, but that's happening right here. One cannot have a Bob Catter losing it reference without playing this absolute classic, possibly the most famous speech by an Australian politician in recent years.
I mean, you know, people are entitled to their sexual proclivities, you know. I mean, let there be 1,000 blossoms bloom as far as I'm concerned, you know. But I ain't spending any time on it because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
My next guest is the filmmaker behind The War on Children. This is a film about the manner in which far-left activists have targeted children, how they indoctrinate them, guilt and groom them, and even punish them until they submit to woke ideology.
This is what you don't want kids to see, is that correct?
Exactly.
And again, this is depicting children. This is supposed to be kids.
Well, honestly, I didn't even know that transition from female to male was an option until I was on social media and began being exposed to those type of communities.
You've never seen an 18-month-old masturbating?
No, I haven't. Have you seen any sexually explicit drag shows marketed as all ages for kids that you would denounce or think that are a problem and that you want to distance yourself from?
No.
You know this is wrong.
So, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to end the interview.
Your daughter was secretly transitioned at school.
This policy has to do with children as young as 5 all the way through high school.
Penthouse footed the bill to lobby before state boards of education. Yes, Penthouse and Playboy. The history behind this is far darker than most Americans understand.
Joining me now is host of the Robby Starbuck show and filmmaker, Robby Starbuck. Robby, last week your film had clocked up more than 47 million views. Tell me what you hope to achieve with the film The War on Children.
Well, we far surpassed what I hoped to achieve. I hope to get the truth out there, and this has kind of exploded into one of the most watched documentaries of all time. I mean, it's few and far between documentaries that even get 1 million views, let alone we're closing in on 50 million. You know, so the goal, though, was to wake up parents to what is going on and grandparents to what is going on, because there's so many people asleep at the wheel who don't realize that there is a mass operation to sexualize children and to fundamentally change the values of the next generation. Because the people in power, the elitists that are essentially running the planet, they need these young people to buy into this modern communist ideology.
Now, your film is a truly harrowing insight into how wokeness or so-called liberalism is affecting children. Let's have a look at a brief compilation from the film.
There is misinformation presented that somehow that we're doing surgery on minors or even children, and that simply is not true.
How old were you when they gave you a double mastectomy?
It was a month after my 13th birthday.
Ultimately, we're going to talk about, are they going to give, the counselor's going to give them medication there at school without their parents' permission? I mean, I think we're leading towards an absurd and horrific time.
First of all, we weren't forewarned we would be sharing a locker. We had no idea. I turned around, a 6'4", 22-year-old man, fully intact with an exposing male genitalia.
How devastating is this agenda for children? How is it impacting their development and well-being?
I'd say one of my favorite parts of the documentary is the teen focus groups that we did, because we sat down and we talked to teenagers and we actually separated them out. They were in groups of 3 usually, because we didn't want any social peer pressure to change the way they would answer questions by having a large group. So we separated into them these small groups, and the answers we got about just how badly this is affecting their generation were truly harrowing. I mean, when they got into it, I mean, some of them started to just vomit out their emotions that, you know, they got addicted to porn and it wasn't by their choice. You know, social media is feeding them algorithms all the time about their identity possibly being wrong and that maybe they're the other gender, and about things that push them toward eating disorders or things. I mean, just you go down this rabbit hole of so many different problems. And then on the flip side of that, we're sending kids to schools that have functionally become indoctrination centers where they go and they spend their most time on a daily basis to learn to hate the values their parents have taught them. And so something's fundamentally broken here. And I think that's what the film captures, but it also starts to lay out an aspirational path for parents to a time of sanity that we can get back to if every parent realizes that we can't wait for a politician to save us. A politician is not going to save us from this. This is going to be every parent standing up, organizing together on a local level, and changing things for their kids.
Well, we're seeing that happen in many states across America. Sadly, here in Australia, there is a mass ignorance about what's happening. There's a lot of secrecy around what's happening. But we are told over and over again, both here and in the US, that these medicalised interventions, irreversible surgeries, are not happening to under 18 children. But that is not the case. And I know I've spoken to victims who are now suing the doctors who removed their healthy breasts, and you also spoke to victims. One of them, Layla Jane. Let's have a look.
I initially started seeing doctors for my gender dysphoria when I was 12. So it was within that time frame, within a year.
What age were you when they put you on puberty blockers?
I was 12 years old.
12 years old. Doctors gave you a drug called Lupron. This drug has been used to chemically castrate sex offenders, pedophiles in prison, but they prescribed it to you to stop your hormones. Is that correct?
Correct. At 12 years old.
Do you believe that you were given informed consent about the risks of puberty blockers?
I don't think so. I think, it was spoken of very lightly. I mean, they really did say it's just a pause. There were some slight concerns about my bone development, but, they just told me to take some vitamin D.
Vitamin D, that's it. That poor girl ended up having a double mastectomy at 13. How could doctors inflict that sort of damage on such a young child?
When I grew up, there was this idea that you implicitly trusted the doctors just wanted to help you. I mean, they took an oath to do no harm, right? And so when I went into this, the process of filmmaking, that was actually one of the things that really bothered me going in, is I thought that can't have fundamentally changed as much as some of these people are saying. But the further and deeper we got into this, we realized that paradigm is gone. It is gone. It is functionally turned into a sick care system where the doctors are allegiant to the big pharmaceutical companies and to the ideological woke lunatics who are running their professional organizations. And again, this is an example of how the left, you have to tip your hat to them in terms of the deep work they have done to funnel into these organizations, take them over, use their power to fundamentally change the culture, not just of America, but of the world, because it will spread from here. We cover in the documentary that these numbers are exploding here in America, but we're also seeing signs they're exploding across the West. And so functionally, this disease we're seeing here in America, this disease of wokeness, it is going to spread, and it will take down the West as a whole, if we do not stand up and really effectively stop this. And that means that we have to do some hard things. You've got to be uncomfortable. You know, my family had to flee communism once already in Cuba. And I'm going to sort of paraphrase a story Ronald Reagan used to tell, which is that he talked to a Cuban refugee who said that actually Americans are not lucky. He was lucky. He was lucky because he had somewhere to run to. But if communism ever came to America, there is nowhere else to go. There's nowhere to run to. You have to be that last battle line to stop the advent of communism upon the world.
Oh, absolutely. And it's across the West, this assault against Western values, this leftist orthodoxy, really radical left orthodoxy, and it's now corrupting, like you said, science and medicine. And that's particularly dangerous because you would think those areas would be above politics.
Yeah, you would. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, all of these ideas that we were fed as children, trust the schools, trust your teachers, trust your doctors, they've all been weaponized against us, you know, and I felt it was very important for me to make this film, especially coming from a background where I've directed Oscar-winning actors, actresses, some of the biggest music stars in the world, because on our side, we lack the storytelling necessary to get these things across really well. And I think the left uses that and they weaponize it really effectively. And so we're going to tell these stories and continue this. And I'm you know, no longer having to answer to Hollywood studios. They can't stop me from going and telling these stories. It doesn't matter what they do. And so we're going to keep getting the truth out there and wake people up. And I think X, I mean, what an amazing change for the whole world that X is allowing this type of content on their platform. Because I can tell you right now, 2 years ago, I would have been banned off of every platform for making this movie. Instead, the owner of the website is, you know, going and featuring it.
Well, absolutely. Elon Musk promoted your film to his, I don't even know how many followers he has these days, over 100 million. And I had a look on X, formerly Twitter. It already has 45 million views, the 2-hour full version of the documentary, which you can watch on the site. So, audience watching at home, I'd urge you to look it up and watch the documentary. You will learn plenty. I want to ask you about a story I saw in the Wall Street Journal last week about Meta staff finding an Instagram tool that enabled child exploitation, and yet Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, they pressed ahead anyway, despite being aware of this tool that could be misused. Robby, how big a problem is big tech when it comes to child exploitation, grooming, and indoctrination?
Let's put it this way. I want to ask every parent watching, after your kid gets home from school, would you turn them over to a foreign enemy and allow them to send a soldier to come and indoctrinate your child? All of you are shaking your head no. That sounds absurd, right? Well, let's just take TikTok. That's what TikTok is. TikTok is owned by a foreign adversary who wants to see the West fall. And our kids are fed algorithms directly from that government, who, by the way, on their version of TikTok, they are only feeding their children educational content. There is nothing like the stuff we see in the West that's being fed to kids. And by the way, if you want to know more about how this assault on big tech is affecting our kids, go to thewaronchildren.com. There's all the different ways to watch the film, and we cover this extensively because all of the social media companies are directly responsible for the harms and deaths of children. And we cover that really well with an ex-Facebook intelligence analyst and the head of Heritage Foundation's Technology Center. We really dive deep into this, and we talk to the kids who share some really amazing stuff about how they hide these apps from their parents. So parents can learn from that and understand, even if you think you're doing a great job, how these kids are getting out in front of you.
Now, before you go, I'm interested in your take on the suicide, the man who set himself alight, a serving US airman, Aaron Bushnell. I've had a look at his online activity, and this man was clearly radicalised. He was a radicalised leftist, fan of Antifa. He was given clearance and allowed to work in the Air Force's intelligence surveillance wing. It's clear he hated the country he was meant to serve. How does this happen? How can you have someone who's anti-military, anti-police, anti-white? He seemed to tick every box in the neo-Marxist toolkit. How did he get that level of clearance and didn't raise any red flags?
It's very simple. The people in charge of our country, in charge of defending it, they are enemies of truth. And so if you look at that just from the very top, somebody like Rachel Levine, a person who masquerades to be something that they're not, and beyond that, as you go down the line, wokeness has infected every level of our military, and they forced a vaccine on our soldiers that many of them did not want. These are men who signed up to die for us. They signed up to pay the ultimate price to save our lives, to save our freedoms, and their government turned around and stabbed them in the back. So, it's not a surprise to me. It's the reason recruitment levels are they're beneath the ground. They're 6 feet under at this point. Our government is in tatters over it, and we're not going to have enough people in the military to defend ourselves if it continues at this rate. So it doesn't surprise me, but I will say this, I think it's disgusting that there is a group of people on the left who are praising this man and potentially influencing young people to go and burn themselves alive for a cause. This man was mentally ill. Anybody who does that is mentally ill, and they deserve mental health care. They need to be cared for and brought back to reality, because nobody in their right mind would burn themselves alive for a cause that is not theirs, for a country that is not theirs, thousands of miles away. It is not a sane thing to do. If he felt that passionate about his view, there's plenty of other things he could have done aside from doing that. And it's clearly wrong that they're willing to take the mental health struggle of somebody like that and use it for their own gain.
Robby Starbuck, thank you so much for your time this evening, and I would urge all our viewers to check out The War on Children. Still to come, I crossed to London to find out what has happened to Princess Kate, and Britain finds out that mass migration does not lead to economic prosperity. Darren Grimes next. You're watching the Rita Panahi Show. Joining me now is GB News host Darren Grimes. Darren, let's start with the news that has tongues wagging from London to LA and right here in Australia. Where is Princess Kate? We know the Princess of Wales had abdominal surgery back in January 16. She was in hospital for 2 weeks. It's a long time. And since then, she's not been seen in public. Last time we saw Kate was on Christmas Day when she and Prince William took the children to church. What's going on, Darren?
It's a very good question, Rita, and as you say, it's one that the world is asking, never mind the Commonwealth and other realms and territories as well. I mean, in the images that we're seeing on screen right now, all smiles, all charm, doing that traditional yomp to Sandringham Church. But since then, of course, as you know, Kate's gone quieter than a mouse in slippers. Now, this of course, comes when Prince William is a no-show at King Constantine's memorial service. Now, that has chucked a real spanner in the works, because the palace only said that this was a personal matter. But as everyone is aware, in this industry, silence speaks louder than words. With the king tackling his own health battles as well, there's a right and proper concern about the firm's front line. Now, His Majesty the King, he was banging on for many years before he became, as he was the Prince of Wales, about a slimmed down monarchy. But with that comes this hefty risk. If the key players are off the field, it leaves all of us wondering who's left to carry the ball, right? And our Queen knew that all too well. She said herself that actually she has to be seen, and there is power in being seen, especially in the age of Twitter twaddle and non-stop news. It's trickier than a Sudoku, frankly, for royals to actually keep up the number of appearances necessary in order to actually be seen. So we're stuck here between a rock and a hard place. And I think Kensington Palace have got to decide. They're zipped up tighter than a drum right now. But until they actually give us the word straight from the horse's mouth, we're all going to be out here playing the guessing game. Because Buckingham Palace were open and honest and frank about the king having cancer, but less so about the Princess of Wales. So we're all left wondering, Rita, and it's going to go on and on.
Well, it is, and she's a healthy young woman, so for her to be spending 2 weeks in hospital with abdominal surgery, that raised all sorts of questions. Have we had any clarity yet on what sent her to hospital? They said it was a planned operation, but that doesn't really tell anybody much, and I can understand why there are concerns because she hasn't been seen for a couple of months now. Is this an ongoing health issue that she is battling?
Yeah, so the only thing that we've actually had confirmed is that it isn't cancer, because, of course, His Majesty the King is suffering from cancer. I think we've reached a point where the palace is treading a very fine line where, we're not owed a peek into every nook and cranny of royal lives, but when the palace has been spilling the beans about the king's health, as I say, openly and honestly, it sets a precedent. It's like opening a window in a sandstorm. You can't be surprised when dust starts to settle within. So until we get the full 10 yards from Kate and William's corner, the rumour mill is just going to keep on churning. And with the palace playing their cards close to their chest, at least Kensington Palace, this tale is going to whip up one hell of a storm, no doubt about it, because as you say, fit and healthy, smiles over Christmas, a full diary over Christmas, and actually really excelling in those roles over Christmas. Something is going on, and it has to be serious for it to warrant such a elongated period out of sight.
Absolutely. Now, I want to ask you about a piece I saw in The Telegraph. Sam Ashworth-Hayes wrote about the lies we are told about mass migration, how we're told it's good for economic growth, good for living standards. He says it's a failed experiment, writing report after report, data set after data set is hammering home a simple message. Mass migration is not making Britain better off. Time after time, the British public have voted to cut immigration, and yet we've got the elites writing this off as ignorance. They should consider instead that it is simply rational self-interest. The question is, Darren, are the Tories listening?
No one's listening to us, Rita. They haven't been for as long as I've been on this planet, 30 odd years. I've been on this blessed rock, and we've been sold this fairy tale that throwing open your borders as wide as can be, like a sort of Harry kiss and tell memoir, all encompassing. It's a tap that was twisted by that demon Tony Blair, Rita, right? And we were told that this was the golden ticket to prosperity. It was a story so slick, right? It could make a penguin in a tuxedo look underdressed. But we were promised the moon on a stick, that it would be an economic boom, cultural riches, the works, you name it. But as the saying goes, Rita, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Because every working class person in Britain will tell you, we even allow illegal immigrants in this country, Rita, at wages that undercut the native population to work. And I'm afraid that the mighty liberal economic theory here that the Tories have swallowed and basically adhered to hook, line and sinker, it's crumbled under the cold, hard light of reality. And as you say, our friends in the Conservative Party, the experiment we've watched unfold over the last 14 years and longer, the results are now in. 700,000 was the numbers of net migration last year. We're watching a train wreck in slow motion, and the problem is that it's our country's future that's gone off the rails, because the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the ones saying actually that they're not a bunch of radical lefties. This is just the latest blow to actually, I think, blow the whistle on this, to take a sledgehammer to this dream that we've been sold, a lie.
We've got exactly the same phenomenon right here in Australia. Both sides of the political divide, like big numbers coming in. We had over 500,000 net in the last financial year, so not far behind Great Britain. Darren Grimes, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks, Rita.
That's it from me tonight. Up next is Newsnight. Good night.